The day of my daughter Lily's birthday, I was racing to find my wife, Claire, who was training at her taekwondo studio. That was the day I crashed the car. I remember standing outside the emergency room, the sterile scent of antiseptic burning my nostrils, frantically calling Claire's phone. Her voice, when she finally answered, was laced with an icy sarcasm that cut deeper than any physical wound. "You say you're dying, Arthur? Well, maybe then I'd consider coming back to see you one last time." Later, a news report flickered across a waiting room television. It was Claire, her eyes glistening with tears of triumph, not sorrow, as she and her star student accepted a prestigious award. She threw her arms around the young, handsome trainee, her gaze lingering on him with an unmistakable, tender warmth that tore through me. I sat on the cold stone steps of the crematorium, the small, ornate box containing Lily's ashes clutched tightly in my hands. A hollow numbness had settled over me, a refusal to accept that my sweet, bright, adorable Lily was now just a handful of cold, gray dust. My phone vibrated, the ringtone a cheerful melody I'd specifically set for Claire. It felt like a cruel joke. "Arthur, are you out of your mind?" Claire's voice, sharp with irritation, crackled through the speaker the moment I answered. "Why have you been blowing up my phone? Don't you know I'm overseas for the championships these past few days?" Lily was in an accident. I managed, my eyes squeezed shut against a fresh wave of pain, my voice a raw, broken whisper. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause. Then, a chillingly dismissive laugh. "Arthur, why don't you just say you were in an accident? Better yet, tell me you're on your deathbed. That might actually tempt me to fly back for a final goodbye." I had braced myself for many possible reactions, but not this. Not this utter, heartless indifference. It was as if our daughter's life, her very existence, was nothing more than a tasteless joke to her. "If there's nothing important, don't call me again." Before I could even form a response, the line went dead. Claire. She had changed, truly, irrevocably changed. I carried Lily's ashes home. The apartment felt vast and empty. On the dining table sat a melting buttercream cake, Lily's favorite, a custom-ordered Kuromi design, now emitting a sickly sweet, decaying odor. A wave of nausea washed over me. My stomach, empty for what felt like days, clenched in protest, and I doubled over, dry heaving. Stumbling into the bedroom, I rummaged through the back of a closet until my fingers brushed against a long-forgotten pack of cigarettes. My hands trembled as I lit one, the acrid smoke a strange comfort. Through the haze, a notification popped up on my phone, a social media post from Claire. The thumbnail showed her locked in a tight embrace with a young man, their faces alight with exhilaration. Before I could process it, my thumb had already clicked on the video. Claire, radiant and triumphant, her student by her side, hoisting a trophy from a major taekwondo tournament. The crowd roared. The video culminated in that same tight hug, an embrace that seemed to last an eternity. As they received their medals, their eyes met, a deep, lingering look that spoke volumes, charged with an intimacy that made the crowd around them whoop and cheer. And that day, the day of her glorious victory, was Lily's birthday. Lily's photograph, a small, framed picture of her beaming smile, sat on the table beside her ashes. The stark, monochromatic gray of the urn and the muted tones of the photo stood in chilling contrast to the vibrant, joyful colors of Claire's celebration on the screen. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I clenched my fists, my nails digging so deeply into my palms that I felt the sting of blood welling. The physical pain was a dull anchor, barely tethering me to the storm of hatred surging within. I couldn't understand how Claire had become this person. Lily was the daughter we had adopted together, a decision born from a shared dream that had turned to sorrow. It was after a brutal taekwondo competition injury. Claire had won the championship, but the victory came at a terrible price she could never conceive. So, we had found Lily at an orphanage, a tiny beacon of hope in our lives. To be there for Lily, to give her the stable, loving presence she deserved, I had willingly stepped back from my own demanding career. For the first couple of years, Claire, burdened by guilt, had been exceptionally tender towards me. She would fiercely defend me against the whispers and pointed remarks from neighbors about a stay-at-home father. But gradually, a shift occurred. A chasm opened between us. Her patience wore thin, not just with me, but with Lily too. Our daughter, once showered with affection, now frequently bore the brunt of Claire's sharp rebukes. Sometimes, I'd catch a flicker of something akin to resentment, even hatred, in Claire's eyes when she looked at Lily. She started coming home later and later, until eventually, she was spending most nights at the taekwondo studio. There were, however, these strange, sporadic moments when the old Claire would resurface. She'd return, unexpectedly gentle, showering both Lily and me with affection. Lily, confused and torn, both adored and feared her. Then, just a short while ago, Lily had come running to me, her face alight with a rare, pure joy. "Daddy, Mommy said she'll spend my birthday with me. I'm going to go see her." A knot of unease had tightened in my stomach. I'd wanted to say no, to shield her from potential disappointment, but the hopeful, pleading light in Lily's eyes had made me nod, a reluctant consent. I never imagined it would be our last conversation. "Arthur, what in God's name are you doing?" A familiar voice, sharp and commanding, ripped me from my tormented reverie. I turned, still clutching the urn, my face undoubtedly ashen, my eyes hollow. The door had been kicked open with brutal force. Claire stood framed in the doorway, and beside her, the young man from the video, Liam. The sudden flick of the light switch made her jump as she saw me huddled on the floor. Her expression flickered from shock to a dark scowl. "What is this mess?" she berated. I slowly raised my head, my gaze empty as it swept over her face, then locked onto the protective way she shielded Liam behind her. A cold, hard anger, distinct from the grief, began to crystallize within me. Carefully, reverently, I started to rise, intending to place Lily's urn on the high shelf of the cabinet. Claire's brow furrowed at the glacial look in my eyes. When I ignored her question, focusing solely on the box in my hands, her face darkened further, as if a disturbing thought had struck her. "Arthur, I asked you a question," she snapped, striding towards me, her voice dropping to an even more menacing tone. Then, a sudden, sharp impact. Bang! My wrist exploded in pain. The urn, held so securely just a moment before, tumbled from my grasp. It hit the floor with a sickening crack, shattering into pieces. Ashes, Lily's ashes, billowed out, settling like a macabre gray snow across the polished wood. I wanted to scream, to roar, but I felt as if my soul had been ripped from my body. I just stared, dumbfounded, at the scattered remains, until my vision blurred with unshed tears and my whole body began to tremble uncontrollably. Claire finally seemed to register that something was profoundly wrong. Her frown deepened, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But then, seeing my devastated, pathetic state, she let out a short, derisive laugh. "What on earth was in that shabby box that's got you so worked up?" Her eyes narrowed, filled with scorn, her voice dripping with malice. "Don't tell me. Was it a gift from your precious little childhood flame, Megan?" "Megan, my childhood friend, a sister to me, someone I'd grown up with in the orphanage." I sought out Claire at her taekwondo studio, Lily's death certificate, and the divorce papers clutched in my trembling hand. Yes, I was going to divorce Claire. This toxic, diseased marriage had hollowed me out, leaving me numb and bewildered, humiliated. I will find a better word like diminished or degraded. I felt like some forgotten consort in an ancient palace, pathetically waiting day after day for a sliver of the emperor's favor. But that wasn't who I was. That was never me. Even though I grew up in an orphanage, my academic achievements had always been my strength, my pride. And then, I met Claire. She was the president of the Taekwondo club, a girl who looked gentle and unassuming, yet possessed a black belt and a fierce spirit. I was just a poor student, barely scraping by on scholarships and part-time jobs. We shouldn't have even crossed paths. Until that day, I was walking past a narrow alleyway when I heard desperate cries for help. My first instinct was to call the police and walk away, but the chilling, terrified screams rooted me to the spot. I rushed in, and, predictably, I was beaten half to death. As I lay there, clutching my ribs, praying for the police to arrive, Claire appeared. A whirlwind of controlled fury. Her small frame exploded with astonishing power. She saved me. I ended up in the hospital with 2 broken ribs. The girl I tried to help was merely shaken. I learned then that my rescuer was Claire, the only daughter of our university's Dean of Humanities, and the formidable head of the Taekwondo club. She was passionate, kind, and fiercely righteous, a small sun warming everyone around her. I was utterly captivated. Later, I joined the Taekwondo club, becoming one of her members. My free time was split between part-time jobs and the studio. My roommates would tease me, asking if I was training so hard to compete. I'd just shake my head and smile, burying my adoration deep in my heart. The day I'd saved enough to repay her for the medical expenses she'd insisted on covering, I intercepted her after a class. Under her puzzled gaze, I managed to calmly place the bank card in her hand. Then, fighting the urge to look back, I turned to leave. Arthur Chun, star student of the mechatronics department, her voice, laced with amusement, called after me. You dropped something. I spun around, flustered. She was holding a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of her, one I'd surreptitiously taken and always kept in my wallet. You like me, don't you, bookworm? In that moment, my heart hammered against my ribs. Under her smiling, knowing gaze, I nodded, a single, emphatic gesture. And just like that, we were together. Thinking back on those days brought a fresh wave of sorrow. I couldn't understand, simply couldn't fathom, how two people who had loved each other so deeply could end up like this. More incomprehensible still was how our sweet, innocent Lily could die without evoking even a shred of compassion from the woman who was once her mother. But I didn't want to understand anymore. Not really. Because I was going to divorce her. When I arrived at the taekwondo studio, it was their lunch break. Through the large glass window, I saw Claire gently wiping sweat from the brow of a handsome young man, Liam, the student from the video. They looked incredibly sweet together. It would have been a perfect picture if the woman in it wasn't my wife. I should have been furious, but my heart felt strangely calm, a vast, still lake. Perhaps I truly had let go. I tightened my grip on the two thin sheets of paper in my hand and walked in. The receptionist stopped me. Who's looking for our director? A clear, masculine voice called from an inner office. The door opened, and Liam, the man who had been sharing that intimate moment with Claire, emerged, a confident smile playing on his lips. Please ask Claire to come out. I need to speak with her. Liam's eyes flickered with surprise upon seeing me, then a knowing, almost mocking smirk spread across his face. I had no desire to cause a scene. My only purpose today was Claire. Claire's resting. If you want to see her, make an appointment next time. I'm her husband. Huh? You're her husband? He scoffed. Then contact her yourself. What are you doing here? His words were met with stifled giggles from the receptionist. He was right. As her husband, I didn't even have a reliable way to contact her anymore. What's all this commotion? The door opened again, and I heard that achingly familiar voice. Arthur, what are you doing here? I'll be home after training, don't always. I need to talk to you about something important. I interrupted, my tone flat, almost cold. Claire's impatient expression faltered for a moment. She tossed the towel she was holding to the receptionist and turned, walking out of the studio. She looked like she'd just showered, her hair damp, making her appear remarkably fresh and youthful, almost like the girl I'd fallen in love with at university. In contrast, the burdens of these past few years had etched themselves onto my face, grinding away my sharper edges, leaving me looking worn out and older than my years. She took me to a nearby coffee shop. The server greeted her with a familiar smile and soon placed 2 iced Americanos on our table. I never liked iced Americanos. They were too bitter, too cold. I left mine untouched. Waiter, a glass of hot water, please. Claire, let's get a divorce. We both spoke at the same moment, after a long, heavy silence. What? I said, let's get a divorce. I took a deep breath, repeating the words calmly. Because of your little childhood sweetheart, Megan? Claire's initially composed expression instantly hardened. Her eyes filled with a familiar disgust as she looked at me. Lily is dead. I ignored her baseless, malicious accusation and placed the death certificate on the table in front of her. Claire's face went utterly still. She seemed unable to process my words, her hand moving stiffly, hesitantly, towards the thin piece of paper. A moment later, her breathing became rapid, shallow. The hand holding the certificate began to tremble violently. Arthur, this is fake, right? This is just one of your tricks to get to me, isn't it? Claire's voice was raspy, almost unrecognizable. She stared at me, a desperate hope flickering in her eyes, a hope that slowly died as she met my calm, cold gaze. On the night of August 24th, she said you'd promised to spend her birthday with her. She went looking for you. She was hit by a driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel. Both of them died at the scene. I didn't even get to see her one last time. My voice was devoid of emotion, as if I were narrating a stranger's tragedy. Watching Claire begin to crumble before me, I felt a strange, perverse satisfaction. The agony Lily felt as she died, you needed to taste some of that. I called you hundreds of times that day. You didn't answer a single call. Do you know, Claire? When Lily died, She was still clutching that little bracelet you bought her when we first brought her home. That box you smashed at home the other day, that was Lily's urn. It took me so long to gather her ashes, and even then, some were blown away by the wind. Enough. Stop it. Don't say any more. Claire's face was chalk white. She clapped her hands over her ears, shaking her head, her expression wild, on the verge of hysteria. You never liked Lily anyway, did you? Her dying is convenient for you, isn't it? Saves you the trouble of being annoyed by her every day. I watched Claire gasp for breath, her chest heaving, and I twisted the knife with deliberate malice. Arthur, where is Lily's grave? Lily doesn't have a grave. I scattered her ashes at sea. She always loved the ocean. In death, at least, her wish could be fulfilled. Besides, I added, my voice like ice, Lily probably wouldn't want to see you. After all, you were the one who constantly broke her heart. Finally, I've already signed the divorce papers. Sign them and mail them to me. Then we can finalize it. I coolly retrieved the death certificate from her trembling grasp and tossed the other document, the divorce agreement, onto the table. Then, I stood up and walked away. As I passed her, she clutched at the hem of my jacket. I was about to shake her off when I heard her choked, whispered plea. Arthur, Lily's photo. Can you at least leave me her photo? No. I laughed coldly, yanking my jacket free. Lily wouldn't want to see you. In the quiet cafe, Claire's muffled sobs were shockingly clear. But I felt none of my former pity, none of my old tenderness. After leaving that day, I packed up my and Lily's belongings and moved out. Although I had made the down payment on the house, Claire had been paying the mortgage for years, and the deed was in her name. I wanted no further entanglement with her. Whether she continued to live there or decided to sell it, it was no longer my concern. I needed to find a job to rebuild my life. During those years I'd spent at home with Lily, I'd occasionally taken on freelance online work to keep my skills sharp and stay connected to the professional world. While I may not have graduated at the top of my class, years of dedicated study had given me a solid foundation of knowledge. I remembered one instance, translating a highly technical engineering paper that was, bizarrely, part of a fictional novel. I'd made a professional comment, praising the author's accuracy. The author then added me as a friend. Only then did I discover he was a leading figure in robotics engineering, Professor Davies, a hardcore scientist with a secret passion for literature. When he learned I was a robotics graduate from a prestigious university, currently unemployed to care for my child, he had enthusiastically invited me to join his research team. I declined then, but he'd regretfully said the offer stood if I ever changed my mind. Since then, he'd frequently sent me translation work and sometimes shared progress on their research projects. Every conversation with him was a reminder of my own worth, a stark contrast to the slow erosion of my confidence under Claire's constant belittling and criticism. Thinking of this, I logged onto the freelance platform. Sure enough, having been offline for several days, I was met with a flood of messages, most of them from Professor Davies. He was a distinguished professor and postgraduate supervisor at a top-tier university. Arthur, my boy, look at this data set. Isn't it brilliant? My protégés are absolutely top-notch. Still regretting not joining my team? I can give you another chance, you know. Those scatterbrained senior researchers of mine forgot my lunch again. I'm starving over here. Arthur, why are you offline so much? It's terribly dull without you to bounce ideas off. Arthur, has something happened? Are you all right? If you're facing difficulties, you know where to find me. You have the address. Professor Davies was an amusing, sprightly older gentleman. Chatting with him, I often felt like I was talking to a peer. It was only after a quick online search that I discovered he was nearly 70. Perhaps being engrossed in research kept him young at heart, free from worldly worries. Professor Davies, I'm here. I typed, a small smile touching my lips as I read through his messages. The concern from a man I'd known for less than 2 years felt more genuine than anything I'd received from my wife of 15 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. He replied almost instantly, with the eagerness of a teenager glued to his phone. You once said your offer to join your team was always open. Does that still stand? Absolutely. I'll send you the offer letter right now. You can start in a week. No, wait, I'll send it now. You can start today. I chuckled, looking at the screen, a genuine warmth spreading through me. It felt good to be valued, to be wanted. I booked a flight for the next day to the city where the university was located, the place where my dreams had once begun. Sitting in the departure lounge, scrolling through social media on my phone, a shadow fell over me. I assumed it was just a passerby, and paid it no mind, until a pair of soft hands gently touched my shoulders. I stiffened slightly and looked up. It was Claire, just one day apart, and she looked significantly more worn, more fragile. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, dressed in a black tracksuit. Her complexion seemed even paler, the dark circles under her eyes stark, her lips chapped and peeling. She looked incredibly vulnerable. If this had been before, my heart would have ached, and I would have instinctively reached out to hold her. But now, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of her being an inescapable shadow. "Is there something you want?" I shrugged off her hands, my voice edged with impatience. I even brushed at my shoulder where she'd touched me, as if to wipe away her contact. Claire's face fell, her expression pained. "Where are you going? What concern is it of yours?" I straightened my clothes and stood up. She remained rooted to the spot, unmoving. I frowned, annoyed, and was about to turn and walk away when she grabbed the corner of my jacket. "Arthur, I know you resent me. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but can you at least give me a chance to explain?" Her voice was choked, heavy with unshed tears. I genuinely wanted to tell her that I didn't resent her. I simply saw her clearly now. And honestly, I had no desire for any further contact. I was just an ordinary man. I could be hurt. I could suffer. And I had lost my daughter, my companion for so many years. I opened my mouth, then closed it. She didn't look like she was in any state to listen to reason. I forcibly pried her fingers from my sleeve, slowly smoothing out the wrinkles she'd made. "Claire, there's no possibility for us anymore. So, forgiveness is irrelevant. Let's go our separate ways and find our own peace. I won't be controlling you anymore. There's no one to stand in the way of you and your student pursuing your dreams. You should be happy. I'm not. I didn't. Finally, I want to remind you, sign the divorce papers soon. We still have that 1-month cooling-off period to get through." I didn't bother to watch her struggle for words, simply finishing what I had to say and then turning towards the boarding gate. As I pulled my suitcase towards the check-in, I saw Claire's so-called student, Liam. He was looking at Claire's crumbling form with a pained expression. Then he moved to embrace her. I let out a derisive snort and turned away, refusing to look back. Even though we'd filed for divorce, the process wasn't finalized. Were they really going to be this blatant already? What I didn't see was Claire violently slapping Liam's hands away, her face contorted with disgust as she hissed at him to get lost. The first time I met Professor Davies in person, he looked much more dapper and energetic than in his photos. The moment he saw me, however, his brow furrowed, and a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. "Arthur, my boy," he began, his eyes scrutinizing me. "Did you by any chance participate in the 13th Annual Robotics Innovation Exchange Challenge?" "Yes, I did. But I didn't place," I nodded. Back in university, desperate for prize money, I'd entered almost every competition I could. That included this relatively obscure robotics challenge, primarily because I'd learned the first prize was a substantial sum. But as a novice, just beginning to delve into the field, how could I have possibly succeeded? I'd made it to the top 30, which still earned me a small commendation and a modest cash prize from the university. But why was the professor bringing this up now? That high-speed autonomous robot, was that your design? I nodded again. Suddenly, the professor's face lit up with excitement. He threw his arms around me in an enthusiastic hug, patting my back repeatedly. I stared at him, bewildered by his beaming expression, completely mystified. It wasn't until he led me into the main laboratory that understanding dawned. The advanced robot they were currently developing was, in fact, an enhanced version built upon the foundation of my original high-speed robot design. No wonder it had all felt so familiar. Even when I first encountered his fictional writing, there had been an inexplicable sense of connection. And later, the data analysis, the technical discussions. Despite being away from the field for so long, I could still engage with the material, discuss the intricacies with ease. I was quickly accepted by my new colleagues in the lab. When they learned I was the creator of the original prototype, they were eager to pick my brain, to learn from my initial insights. Back then, I was just a freshman, barely initiated into the complexities of the discipline, unburdened by established theories and technical dogma. All I had was raw passion and a singular, perhaps naive, vision. If you asked me to replicate it now, I probably couldn't. Professor Davies worked alongside us every day, conducting experiments, sharing meals, engaging in lively discussions, his energy seemingly boundless. As for me, apart from a fixed outing on payday to send money to the orphanage, I rarely stepped outside the lab. One day, As I was wrestling with a particularly perplexing set of data, the professor clapped me on the shoulder, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Arthur, there's a young lady outside asking for you." I was taken aback. Who would be looking for me now? Curiosity, however, got the better of me, and I headed towards the entrance. It was Claire. I hadn't seen her in a year. She had lost a tremendous amount of weight. Her once well-proportioned, slender figure now looked alarmingly frail. She was wearing a dark, gray trench coat, which, combined with her gauntness, gave her an almost forbidding, unapproachable aura. I paused, momentarily struggling to recognize her. She had changed so much. "Arthur." The moment Claire saw me, the cold, distant expression on her face vanished, replaced by a look of such profound tenderness that it momentarily transported me. In the early days of our marriage, she used to look at me like that. "What can I do for you?" I shook my head, a wry smile playing on my lips. Humans are creatures of habit, prone to nostalgic recollections. "Are you doing well now?" Claire seemed to have 1,000 things she wanted to say, but after a long hesitation, she only managed this inconsequential question. "As you can see, I'm doing all right. If there's nothing else, I should get back to work." I gave her a puzzled look, not quite understanding her behavior. "Wait, the divorce agreement. I've had it redrafted. Could you sign it?" My motion to turn away stopped. I watched as she pulled a document from her bag. It finally dawned on me. I had told her to mail the agreement to me, but I'd never given her my new address and had blocked all her contact methods. No wonder she'd tracked me down. A humorless smile touched my lips as I took the papers from her. I pulled a pen from my shirt pocket and signed my name. "When do you want to finalize the divorce at the registry?" I asked as I signed, but received no reply. When I finished and looked up, I saw that Claire's face was streaked with tears. She was crying silently, her eyes red and swollen, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was a heart-wrenching sight, though it didn't stir any sympathy in me. Not anymore. I knew what kind of person she was. "Arthur, is there really no chance for us anymore?" She looked directly at me, the pain and helplessness in her eyes making me feel strangely accused, as if I were the one who had wronged her. "Claire, you were the one who ignored me for years. You were the one carrying on with another man. You didn't even bother to ask about our daughter when she was critically injured." Seeing the anguish in her eyes, my voice grew harsher. "I'm truly tired. Maybe our marriage was a mistake from the very beginning. Maybe I should have listened to your parents back then." I pulled my hand free from her desperate grip, my tone cold and final. "Arthur, I can explain." "What's the use of explaining now? In 10 years of marriage, why didn't you explain then? Our daughter is gone now. I don't want any further connection with you. Claire, we are well and truly over." Without waiting for her reply, I turned and walked back towards the lab, the signed divorce papers in hand. I heard Claire's hurried footsteps behind me, then the sound of security guards politely but firmly stopping her at the entrance. "So, Arthur, who was that lovely lady looking for you?" Professor Davies' teasing gaze made me roll my eyes. "My soon-to-be ex-wife, with whom I'm finalizing divorce proceedings," I retorted flatly. Watching the professor retreat with a somewhat chastened expression, I couldn't help but shake my head. Such an old child. A week later, I called Claire. Her voice on the other end was cautious, laced with a mixture of tentative joy and apprehension. I had already made an appointment online. We would go to the registry on the afternoon of August 24th to get our divorce certificate. Upon hearing the date, Claire fell silent. The silence stretched for so long that I thought she had hung up. Finally, I heard her choked response. "August 24th, Lily's birthday, and the anniversary of her death." I admit, I chose that date deliberately. I arrived early. It was just past 2 p.m., and I was already at the registry office entrance. Claire was nowhere to be seen. 5 minutes later, I called her. As her phone rang, I heard a familiar melody from around the corner, "Holding Your Hand," the song that had played on a loop at our wedding ceremony. It was abruptly silenced. "Since you're here, let's get this over with," I called out towards the corner. The divorce process was swift. Apart from the slightly uncomfortable way the staff member kept looking at me, everything went smoothly. Perhaps it was because Claire's expression was so utterly desolate that the official assumed I was the heartless one, the villain of the piece. But I felt no need to explain. My life was my own. There was no point in burdening myself with the opinions of strangers. The moment I stepped out of the registry office, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The oppressive weight that Claire's presence had cast over my mood these past few days lifted instantly. I glanced at the bright red divorce certificate in my hand, then reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, delicate bracelet. This is the bracelet Lily was holding when she died. You gave it to her when we first brought her home. Now it's back with its original owner. I placed the bracelet in Claire's palm. The pink beads shimmered in the sunlight, looking exquisitely beautiful. But the person who had treasured it was gone. Claire didn't appear in my life again after that day. I continued to immerse myself in my work at the research lab. Professor Davies constantly urged me to get out more, warning that I'd turn into a recluse, but I had little inclination. I wasn't as young as my colleagues, and I was still relatively new to this specific area of research. I had to work twice as hard to keep pace. But Professor Davies was insistent. He even rented an apartment for me nearby, adamantly refusing to let me live in the lab anymore. Reluctantly, I moved out. One day, I received a message from the director of the orphanage. She asked if I knew a young woman named Clara Moon. Apparently, this woman had recently donated a significant amount of money to the orphanage and, on each visit, had inquired about me. I racked my brain. Before university, I'd had almost no contact with girls. During university, I was too busy with part-time jobs and competitions. Apart from Claire, I hadn't really known any other women well. Wait a minute. Claire? Clara? Moon you? Could it be? During a break, I returned to the orphanage. As I approached, I heard peals of laughter. Looking closer, I saw Megan, the childhood sweetheart Claire had accused me of. I hadn't seen her in ages. She had matured considerably, and a kind-looking man stood gently by her side. I smiled and walked over to greet them. Arthur, you rascal. Where have you been hiding yourself lately? Megan was as boisterous and straightforward as ever. Just slogging away, where else? I chuckled. Oh, by the way, I think I saw your wife recently. I was about to say hello, but she hurried off. I meant to tell you, but it slipped my mind. I've been divorced for a year and a half. Arthur, the orphanage director approached us as Megan and I were catching up. That young woman is here again with a donation. Would you like to meet her? I had a strong suspicion it was Claire, but seeing her in person still came as a shock. It was mostly because of how incredibly thin she was. It had only been about 6 months since I'd last seen her, but she had become alarmingly emaciated. She was wearing the same outfit I'd seen her in last time, but now it hung on her frame, terrifyingly loose. Her cheeks were hollowed out. Perhaps I was staring too intently, because she avoided my gaze, looking flustered. Long time no see. Long time no see, Claire. I suppressed the turmoil of my thoughts and responded with a faint, polite smile. I spent most of my time in the research lab, rarely paying attention to outside affairs. But since Claire was my ex-wife, people still occasionally mentioned her to me. Megan was the most frequent source. After our brief reunion at the orphanage, she had resumed her old habit of messaging me regularly. I learned that she had gotten married this year and was planning a wedding ceremony for the next. She'd married quite late. Though a few years younger than me, she was now in her late 30s. She brought up Claire, jokingly asking if our divorce was because of her, Megan. I scoffed at her playful narcissism. But then, she told me something startling. Claire had actually sought her out a long time ago. About 9 years ago. 9 years. That was the second year after we had adopted Lily. A sudden, chilling realization struck me. It was around that time that Claire had begun to change. So, she had believed all along that I was having an affair? Isn't it hilarious? Megan's message continued. She even asked me back then why I would abandon my own child. I was only 24 at the time. Arthur, what child was she talking about? I just thought she was crazy. But thinking back now, the pain and conflict in her eyes. She must have genuinely misunderstood something. Maybe you should talk to her again. Reading Megan's long message, I fell silent for a long time. I typed and deleted several replies in the chat box, but in the end, I sent nothing. So, all this time, Claire had believed Lily was my child with Megan. She probably could never truly accept her own infertility. And during that period, Megan, facing difficulties at work, had been constantly venting to me, sending long streams of messages. Claire must have misinterpreted this, believing that Lily, whom we adopted from the orphanage, was Megan's biological child whom I was secretly raising. A bitter smile twisted my lips. No wonder her attitude towards Lily and me had changed so drastically. No wonder she sometimes looked at Lily with such undisguised hatred in her eyes. But it was all too late now. Because of her hatred, her misunderstanding, I had lost Lily. This would forever be an insurmountable barrier between us. There was no going back for Claire and me. I gently touched the photograph of Lily on my desk, her smile radiant and full of life. I pushed all other thoughts away. Actually, things were okay as they were now. 2 years and 7 months later, Professor Davies' improved high-speed robot successfully completed its final tests. It was scheduled for exhibition and deployment at the end of the year. As a key member of the development team, I was expected to attend the launch. I had initially wanted to decline. I'd been feeling inexplicably agitated and restless lately. But under strong persuasion from everyone, I went to the exhibition hall. Unexpectedly, I encountered a familiar face at the event. It was Liam, the student from Claire's taekwondo studio. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, a white flower pinned to his lapel. He walked towards me with a grim, determined purpose. My colleagues and Professor Davies instinctively moved to shield me, their eyes wary as they watched him approach. Arthur Chun, his voice was raw with emotion. If you have any shred of decency left in you, you'll come with me to her funeral. Whose funeral? The name Claire flashed instantly in my mind. But I dismissed it just as quickly. How could that be possible? Arthur Chun, you don't deserve her love. You don't deserve it. Security guards were pulling him away, but he fought against them, his face contorted in a mask of grief and fury. You cold, heartless bastard. How could she still be thinking of you, even as she was dying? How? His voice, full of hatred, echoed through the hall. This outburst left me profoundly unsettled. The second half of the exhibition hadn't even concluded, but I excused myself to Professor Davies and quickly dialed Claire's number. As my fingers expertly keyed in the digits, I realized with a pang of self-mockery that I still remembered her number by heart. I pressed the call button. The phone rang and rang, unanswered. Just as the third call was about to end, and I was about to give up, someone picked up. Hello? Claire? I asked, my voice inexplicably hesitant. This is Claire's mother. Where is Claire? I pressed, a sense of urgency gripping me. Is this Arthur? Claire, she passed away a few days ago. We're holding her funeral today. The rest of her words blurred into a roaring in my ears. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. Claire really dead? But I had seen her not long ago. She had seemed not well, but not dying. I booked the earliest flight back to the city where I had lived for over a decade. After disembarking, a wave of confusion washed over me. Should I attend her funeral? In what capacity? Her ex-husband? Ultimately, I turned off my phone. I took a taxi back to the apartment we had shared for 10 years. A strange sense of nostalgia filled me. I wondered if new tenants had moved in. As I pushed my suitcase towards the familiar building complex, the security guard at the gate smiled and greeted me. Mr. Chun, where have you been traveling? Haven't seen you in such a long time. I was a bit dazed, just managing a nod and a faint smile in return. Reaching the apartment door, I saw the familiar fingerprint lock. On pure instinct, my thumb pressed against the sensor. Welcome home. A familiar voice chimed. It was a recording of my own voice that Claire had specially arranged with the locksmith. She had laughed at the time, saying that this way, she could hear my voice the moment she came home every day. The door clicked open. The interior was exactly as I had left it. Even the things I had taken with me seemed to have reappeared, neatly in their places. It was an eerie, disorienting feeling, as if I still lived there. I slipped on a pair of well-worn slippers by the door, my slippers, and walked into the bedroom. My old clothes were neatly arranged in the wardrobe, but the only difference was they all looked brand new, as if recently purchased or meticulously cared for. My phone rang. I answered it automatically. It was Claire's lawyer. He informed me that according to the terms of our revised divorce agreement, upon her death, the property would be transferred to me. I was stunned. The agreement hadn't stipulated that the house would go to her. Later, I found out. The day Claire had come to find me at the lab, she had brought a newly drafted divorce agreement. At the time, consumed by my own pain and haste, I hadn't bothered to read the contents. I'd never realized she had changed it. When I arrived at the cemetery with a bouquet of deep red roses, the sky was still tinged with the pale light of dawn. The cemetery was quiet, almost deserted, except for an old groundskeeper sweeping listlessly among the graves. The cemetery was vast. It took me a long time, but I finally found Claire's headstone, right next to Lily's. Actually, I had lied to her about scattering Lily's ashes at sea. I think, somehow, she must have known. Seeing the familiar photograph on her gravestone, the reality of her death finally, truly, hit me. She had always been so vibrant, so healthy. Suddenly, I remembered the last 2 times I had seen her, her gaunt, skeletal appearance. The signs had all been there, precursors to this end. But back then, my heart was no longer filled with love and concern for her, only with bitterness and resentment. Naturally, I hadn't noticed her alarming decline. I placed the roses before her gravestone and looked at her smiling face in the photo one last time. The sun slowly climbed the horizon, casting its warm, orange glow over her grave and lilies. Their bright, joyful smiles in the photographs seemed to shimmer, and for a moment, I was lost in a daze. If only. But in this world, there are no if-onlys. End.